Two boys failed a genius test in 1921 and grew up to win Nobel Prizes anyway. 1,500 kids who passed that same test, history barely remembers one of them. In 1921, a Stanford psychologist screened 168,000 children across California. He was hunting for the future leaders of the 20th century, the scientists, the statesmen, the minds that would define an era. He narrowed the pool down to about 1,500 kids. Every one of them had an IQ over 135. Some cleared 190. He called them the Termites. He tracked them for the rest of their lives, their grades, their marriages, their careers, their deaths. Decades later, when the final reports came in, not one of them had won a Nobel Prize. Not one. Meanwhile, two boys who were tested and rejected, kids whose IQ scores weren't high enough to make the cut, grew up and won Nobel Prizes in physics. One of them helped invent the transistor, the device sitting inside every phone in this room right now. Let that sink in. The kids selected for greatness became dentists, insurance salesmen, mid-level bureaucrats. The kids who got turned away built the modern world. If intelligence was the whole story, this shouldn't be possible. But it happens more than anyone wants to admit. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why. The hidden psychological mechanism that turns a gifted child into a stalled-out adult, the specific moment in a smart kid's life where the trap gets set, and the 5 behavioral patterns, backed by real research from Stanford, Columbia, and beyond, that quietly convert raw potential into permanent nothing. If you've ever been called the smart one and somehow still feel behind, stay to the end, because this one's about you. The comfortable lie. Here's the story most people tell themselves. Smart people succeed, and if they don't, the world just failed to notice them. It's a flattering story. It lets you keep the identity, gifted, talented, ahead of the curve, without ever having to test it against the real world. But the term and data suggests something colder. The problem usually isn't the world failing to recognize talent. It's that raw intelligence, left alone, does almost nothing to guarantee a person will act. In fact, in a strange number of cases, it does the opposite. It becomes a reason to never start. That sounds backwards. So let's look at why it's true, starting with what's actually happening inside a smart brain when it solves a problem versus when it does something about it. Trap 1, the high of understanding. In the 1990s, a neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz ran a series of experiments that changed how we understand motivation. He was tracking dopamine, the brain chemical everyone associates with pleasure and reward. What he found surprised people. Dopamine doesn't mainly fire when you get the reward. It fires earlier, at the moment your brain predicts the reward is coming. The chemical high happens on the way there, not at the finish line. Now apply that to a sharp, fast-thinking mind. A smart person reads a book on fitness, or finance, or starting a business. Their brain processes it quickly. Within minutes, they can see the whole plan, what needs to happen, in what order, why it'll work. That moment of seeing the solution clearly triggers real dopamine. It feels like progress. The problem is, nothing has actually happened yet. The book is closed. The plan lives only in their head. But neurologically, their brain has already logged a partial win. This is why so many intelligent people have a shelf of half-finished books, a folder of abandoned business plans, a gym membership they were about to use properly. The insight felt so satisfying that acting on it started to feel unnecessary. The brain got its reward early and stopped pushing. Psychologist Barry Kaufman, who has spent years studying gifted underachievement, has pointed out that for many high IQ people, the gap isn't a lack of ideas. It's that understanding something and doing something feel almost identical inside their own head. And when two things feel the same, the brain will always choose the cheaper one. Less naturally gifted people don't get this shortcut. They have to actually do the work before they feel any relief. So they do it, because there's no other way to get the payoff. The smart kid, ironically, has an easier way to feel good. And that ease is exactly what quietly wrecks them. Trap 2, the praise that backfires. Now go back further, to childhood, where this pattern often gets built in before a kid even understands what's happening to them. In 1998, Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck ran a now famous study with fifth graders at Columbia. She gave the kids a set of puzzles. Afterward, she split them into two groups. One group was told, "You must be really smart." The other was told, "You must have worked really hard." Then she offered every child a choice. Try an easier puzzle or a harder one that might make them look bad. The kids praised for being smart overwhelmingly picked the easy puzzle. The kids praised for effort overwhelmingly chose the harder one. Dweck repeated this experiment for years, with different groups, different puzzles. The result held every time. Here's why it matters. When you tell a child they're smart, you're not just complimenting them. You're handing them an identity to protect. From that point on, every hard problem isn't just a puzzle. It's a test of whether they're still the smart one. So the safest move is to avoid anything that might prove otherwise. Multiply that across an entire childhood of being called gifted, advanced, ahead of the class. And you get adults who quietly steer their whole lives away from difficulty. Not because they're afraid of failing, because failing would mean losing the one thing they've built their whole self-worth around. So they specialize. They pick lanes where their intelligence guarantees a win, and they avoid anything. A new skill, a new field, a public attempt, where they might look like a beginner. The kid who was going to write novels becomes a strategy consultant instead, because consulting lets him look smart every single day. Writing a novel would mean being bad at something, in public, for a long time first. Being called gifted was supposed to open doors. For a lot of people, it quietly closes them. Trap 3, all or nothing. This next pattern is the one that explains why so many smart people end up either doing something small and safe or fantasizing about something enormous and distant, with almost nothing in between. Most people's ambitions live on a spectrum. They try things they might be mediocre at. They take on projects they might not finish. That messy middle ground is where most of real life actually happens. Gifted adults tend to avoid that middle entirely. And there's a reason. The middle is where you can actually be measured. If you attempt something realistic and give it real effort, the outcome is legible. Either it worked or it didn't, and there's nowhere to hide. So instead, a lot of gifted people split into two extremes. On one side, they stick to things they've already mastered, where success is guaranteed and low risk. On the other side, they dream about something massive. The company that will change an industry, the novel that will define a generation, the invention that will outlive them. Notice what those big dreams have in common. None of them have actually started. And as long as they haven't started, they can't be judged. The dream stays perfect because it's never been tested. Journalist David Epstein, who studied this pattern extensively for his book Range, found that people who avoid testing themselves against real attempts for too long actually get worse at knowing what they're even suited for. They end up making life decisions based on fantasy instead of feedback, because feedback was the uncomfortable part they kept avoiding. Here's the cruelest twist. The gifted person watching a peer publish a mediocre book or launch a business that struggles often feels a flicker of quiet superiority. I could do better than that, but the peer has something the gifted person doesn't, a finished, real thing that exists in the world. The gifted person still has potential, and in their own private scoring system, unproven potential somehow feels like it's winning. It isn't. It's just better disguised. Trap 4, the brain that outran itself. Here's something most people never get told. A high IQ score measures a narrow set of things: pattern recognition, memory, verbal reasoning. It does not measure your ability to actually organize your life and follow through on a plan. That second skill set, the ability to plan, start, sustain focus, manage your emotions under pressure, and finish, lives in a completely different part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And research on gifted children has repeatedly found something uncomfortable. In many of them, this part of the brain develops more slowly than their raw analytical ability. Clinical psychologist Peg Dawson, who has worked with gifted individuals for decades, describes this as asynchronous development. A child's analytical mind can operate at an adult level by age 11 or 12, while their ability to plan, organize, and follow through stays much closer to their actual age. This isn't a character flaw. It's closer to a wiring gap, and it explains something that looks like a contradiction from the outside. A person who can explain the mechanics of compound interest in detail, but somehow can't remember to pay a bill on time. It's not laziness. The part of the brain that understands the concept and the part of the brain that executes the task simply aren't well connected yet. Here's the trap inside the trap. School often hides this problem completely. Gifted kids can cram the night before, coast on raw ability, and get by without ever building the boring daily systems, routines, habits, follow-through, that other students are forced to build just to survive. Then they hit adulthood, where nobody's grading on a curve anymore, and the gap that was invisible for 18 years suddenly becomes the whole problem. And the instinct that got them this far, think harder, analyze more, actually makes it worse. Because the more they intellectualize the problem, the more energy goes into the part of the brain that was never broken, and the less attention goes toward fixing the part that actually is. Trap 5. Contempt for the grind. There's a final pattern, and it's the quietest, most socially acceptable one, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant, in his research on high achievers, found something consistent across nearly every field. The people who reach the top are rarely the most naturally talented in the room. They're the ones most willing to keep doing unglamorous, repetitive work long after it stopped feeling exciting. The elite musician still drilling basic scales. The surgeon reviewing textbook anatomy after 20 years of practice. The writer who produces pages of mediocre work just to eventually find something good. Gifted people often can't stand this part. Somewhere along the way, they absorb the idea that intelligence should be a shortcut, that if you're really smart, you shouldn't need to grind through the boring stuff everyone else has to do. So a quiet contempt builds. Networking feels beneath them. Marketing feels beneath them. Showing up consistently, day after unglamorous day, feels beneath them. It rarely gets said out loud. It usually gets dressed up as taste or standards. I'm just not going to do it that way. But underneath the taste and the standards is something much simpler, an unwillingness to be visibly average while learning something new. And learning anything worth learning requires exactly that. Being bad at it in front of people for a while. The people who actually build things aren't smarter than the ones who don't. They're just more willing to look like beginners on the way to becoming good. The choice nobody notices making. Here's the part that should change how you think about all of this. None of these 5 traps are intelligence problems. They're identity problems. A gifted person isn't usually failing because the world can't see their talent. They're failing because every one of these patterns exists to protect them from a single moment. The moment their ability stops being a private feeling and becomes a public, testable result. And here's the thing about that moment for most people. It doesn't arrive as one dramatic failure. It arrives slowly in the late 30s or early 40s when they look up and realize that people they once quietly felt superior to have actual things to show. A business that exists, a book that got published, a body of work, a reputation built over decades of unglamorous effort. And they have a head full of ideas and a long list of reasons why none of it happened yet. At that point, there are only 2 directions left. One path, they accept it and start over, doing the small, humbling, entry-level version of the thing they should have started 20 years earlier. It's usually far less impressive than what they once imagined for themselves, but it's real. The other path, they protect the story instead. They get sharper, more articulate, more cutting in their explanations for why the game was rigged, why the people who succeeded got lucky, why they never really wanted it that badly anyway. They stay clever. They stay unbuilt. Lewis Terman thought he was studying the children who would define the century. What he actually selected for was the group whose intelligence got noticed the earliest, and who therefore spent the most years being praised for potential instead of being pushed to prove it. The 2 boys he rejected weren't protected from failure. They kept getting told no, kept getting things wrong, kept doing the ordinary work nobody was celebrating them for, and that's exactly what built them into the people who changed physics. So here's the question worth sitting with. If any part of this hit close to home, has being the smart one been fueling your life or keeping you warm? If it's fuel, you're producing things the world can actually see and judge. If it's a substitute, You're living inside the feeling of potential while the years quietly pass. Most people who needed to hear this today will feel a flash of recognition, nod along, and change nothing. If you want to be the exception, that starts with one unglamorous, unimpressive, very average first attempt at the thing you've been avoiding. If this video actually got under your skin a little, subscribe. There's a lot more here on the psychology of why smart people get stuck and how they get unstuck.